Out. Oh, I was muted still. What's up, Reef builders? My Wi-Fi was out. I'm about 5 minutes late, but now I'm here. This is going to be a tell-all episode where we discuss the dissolved organic carbon article. I got a lot of questions about it, so it is time for people to ask them. I will start with a brief overview talking about the theory behind dissolved organic carbon, how it applies to modern reefs, and then how it applies to our tanks. I will then talk or answer any questions about it. And then I will go into the last part of the article where I discuss a new method of reefing. Okay, so dissolved organic carbon. Think of it like alkalinity. It's not just one chemical. It's a parameter, which is a measure of a multitude of different chemicals. So much like how you can put sugar in water and it dissolves, there are different carbon-based compounds that when they interact with water, they dissolve. So dissolved organic carbon is simply an overall measurement of all of those dissolved organic carbon compounds. So this can look like, carbon dosing, where you're adding vodka or acetic acid through vinegar or sucrose, monosaccharides, polysaccharides, any carbon-based compound that can dissolve in water is taken into the overall calculation of dissolved organic carbon. So essentially, what has been observed in nature over the last 20 years is that basically the primary killer for reefs is not just heat and bleaching, but pollution, runoff. So there has been massive agricultural runoff, wastewater facilities, everything is just pouring into the ocean. There's been lax environmental regulations globally. This is still happening in the United States. Even like in 2010, they determined that Acroporis cervicornis colonies were being wiped out by human gut pathogens that were coming from a wastewater facility. So all of that excess waste that comes because humans are just inherently messy creatures and we don't clean up after our mess. It gets into the water table and then it seeps into the ocean. What that causes is algae to grow. So whenever there's excess nutrients, algae takes advantage of that. They're an organism that can adapt and they like dirty water. In this instance, we're not talking about the inorganic compounds we're typically familiar with, nitrates and phosphates. We are talking about the organic carbon. So it's organic chemistry, not inorganic chemistry, not ICP, total carbon analyzer. This is a completely different side of chemistry that we barely talk about in the industry. We are hyper-focused on inorganic chemistry with ICP, with all of our little handheld spectrophotometers like the Hanna eggs that test for orthophosphates. It's not even all the phosphates. There's organic phosphates too, which I can get into later. But essentially, algae likes dissolved organic carbon, DOC. They love it. So from all this excess runoff, there has been a consequent algae bloom on pretty much all of the natural reefs. This is most apparent in the Caribbean because of all of the first world countries that are kind of surrounding that area. So Florida itself, there's a ton of waste coming from there that is disproportionately large compared to some of the smaller island nations in the Caribbean. And all of that has led to a nutrient influx in the natural reefs. Algae has grown. Algae, as a byproduct of its natural metabolism, will produce even more dissolved organic carbon molecules. Now that creates a feedback loop where there's higher and higher concentrations of DOC and more algae begin to grow and continue to grow. All of this DOC, in terms of the microbial level, fuels copiotrophic bacteria. So there's a distinction here between, basically the nutrient preferences of bacteria writ large. There's copiotrophic and there's oligotrophic. Copiotrophic bacteria love lots of carbon. They love high carbon environments, high nutrient environments, very dirty water. Oligotrophic bacteria like very clean water. So they have evolved to live in low carbon environments. Reefs, over millions of years, because they have been clean, have evolved as an oligotrophic environment. Because of that, all of the good bacteria plankton, as well as the beneficial symbionts that live inside of and on the coral, have evolved to be oligotrophic. Now, because of this influx of carbon, this has shifted natural reefs from an oligotrophic to a copiotrophic environment, from a clean to a dirty environment. This is basically environmental pressure, which then leads to natural selection. So copiotrophic, filth-loving bacteria are now outcompeting all of the good bacteria, which for millions of years have evolved and have been necessary for sustainable reefs. What this manifests as is disease states, all of the dysbiosis stuff. Many of these copiotrophs live inside of the coral, and in oligotrophic environments, they work as friends. They are beneficial workers and help support the coral's immune response, metabolism, everything. But once things are copiotrophic, a genetic switch inside of them is turned on, and they begin to become pathogenic. They have differential virulent gene expression is the technical term for it. So basically, good bacteria become bad as the water increases in carbon concentration, as it becomes dirtier. This causes corals to die off through coral disease, active disease. As corals die, that gives room for more algae to grow in its place. This basically creates a positive feedback loop that over the last 20 years has caused the complete eradication of healthy reefs in the Caribbean. So runoff causes dissolved organic carbon. That causes algae to grow. That produces more dissolved organic carbon. All of the algae releasing those dissolved organic molecules close to the coral causes the coral to go through a dysbiotic event where pathogenic bacteria kill the coral in active disease. The coral dies and more algae grows, which then causes a feedback loop and it continues. Now, something else that can contribute to this a little bit in the wild are sponges. So sponges, when they grow in excess, can produce more dissolved organic matter and basically feed this cycle as well. So a belief right now of why the Caribbean reefs are much more unhealthy compared to Indo-Pacific reefs is because Caribbean reefs naturally have much more sponge cover on them. So just as algae have increased in growth, many of these sponges, which are also produce allelopathic compounds and compete with the coral, have grown as well. Whereas in Indo-Pacific reefs, there's less sponges, and therefore the coral just have to compete with the algae. They don't really have two enemies, they just have one. Now, if you have this model, which is called the DDAM model, which is dissolved organic carbon, disease, algae, and microbes, that's what the model stands for, that's the acronym. If you have this model, plus you have a heat wave and a bleaching event, it is much less likely the corals will survive and recover from that bleaching event if they already are exposed to these external stress events. So it's two stressors or three stressors instead of one stressor. This is why there's all these reports about like coral can recover from bleaching in the Great Barrier Reef. That's getting less and less every single year. So yes, while corals can recover from bleaching, as bleaching gets more frequent and intense, that's less likely to happen. But also corals aren't just dealing with bleaching. Corals are dealing with microplastics, with pollution, with all of these different effects, which all come at them at once. What's up, shrimp guy from Aquashella? Nice to see you here. That is such a story for another time. That was a crazy night. New local Austin, what's up? So yeah, that's the DDAM model of coral recession and reef recession. Basically, when I was in the Bahamas, I observed that firsthand. I saw a phase shift from a coral-heavy environment to an algae-heavy environment. All of the coral that was there was completely diseased and dying. Super depressing. So I started thinking, and I realized that this model plays out in our systems as well. Yeah, Sean, I wonder how many microplastics are in me. It's pretty inevitable at this point, which is quite sad. Awesome. Glad to see you here, man. We need to get you over to the saltwater world. Everyone, make sure to go follow his page. He does a lot of fun freshwater stuff. So, basically, DDAM model, as I just described, is happening in many of our tanks. So basically, every single modern method that has been preached to us adds organic carbon. People carbon dose. People do not do water changes. People have refugiums where they grow macroalgae to manage their nutrients. But paradoxically, this is creating higher levels of dissolved organic carbon. So it's actually making our water dirtier. Tons of macroalgae, lots of macroalgae. Yeah, microalgae in terms of phytoplankton blooms and stuff like that, didn't really see any. Did not see, and much of that is because much of the phytoplankton blooms aren't just macroalgae but bacterial plankton, and those bacterial plankton strains thrive in oligotrophic environments. So it's likely that much of the bacterial plankton, which acts as nutrition for coral and also leads to carbon cycling, has died off because of the shift in carbon concentration as well. So yeah, didn't really see any phytoplankton blooms, which was even worse. So a lot of macroalgae just completely covering all of the healthy coral, taking over, growing on the coral skeletons. So yeah. So amino acids dosing, having refugiums, not doing water changes to align with, trace element programs, having carbon dosing, feeding really dirty foods with fish meal and yeast extract and freeze-dried bacteria, which may or may not be alive. All of these things contribute to super high levels of dissolved organic carbon. There's people have strayed away from running granular activated carbon, GAC. They don't run that in their systems anymore as much because of concerns with trace elements. People don't do water changes anymore through a combination of the cost of water, the cost of salt, and everyone pushing down your throat. It's bad to do water changes. And this weird culture like flexing, I haven't done a water change in 3.5 years. It's likely the only way or the best way that we have right now to lower dissolved organic carbon in our systems. So, for instance, I have not done a water change or anything in my system for 2 years since it was set up. My ORP is super, super low. Dissolved organic carbon or total organic carbon could likely be one of the factors which can lead to a lower ORP. It's not guaranteed. There's many other factors, that could affect redox potential. But as a gut check, it could be a general trend we could look at. So my ORP is like 200. Never done a water change in 2 years. I've been doing 100-gallon water changes weekly, and the amount of detritus I'm pulling out is just like insane, completely filthy. Hundreds of gallons of water, all of it is just black. So, that has likely not been doing me any favors having that in my system, constantly leaching things. I don't dose amino acids. I ripped out my refugium. I've been replacing GAC every 2 weeks. I need to send an ICP to see if that's having an effect, but even if it is, I think that dissolved organic carbon at higher levels is a much larger issue than having a couple traces be lower than they optimally would be. I would rather deal with lower traces or having my traces not be perfect than dealing with sky-high levels of DOC that are likely causing a pathogenic microbiome. The thing is once you have that continual stress from high DOC, any type of external swing is going to trigger a pathogenic event just like that. It'll be like coral in the wild where they're dealing with DOC and they're dealing with heat waves, and they simply can't survive. So people are having issues keeping coral now compared to more than they really ever have before. No wonder. Every single modern method is barking up the wrong tree. Every single company out there is trying to sell you something which contradicts 20 years of science. Looking at how reefs have decreased in value in coral cover and have ended up dying. This data is not new. It's been around since, like 2008, 2009. People in the industry that were experts, people with PhDs like Sanjay and Ken Feldman were, talking about this in 2010. Ken Feldman's a biochemist. He was doing flow cytometry and generating actual data long before, I was 10 years old when that was happening. Everyone in the industry, Matt Wandell, who's an expert, who takes care of some of the most beautiful tanks that I've seen, manages NPS systems, public aquaria. People that really knew what they were talking about, that had influence in the industry, were talking about DOC being an issue and being the big bad a decade and a half ago. What the hell happened? Corruption happened, is what I think. I think ignorance and I think people wanting to make money is what happened. I think that all of this was swept under the rug because people could make more money selling trace elements, selling all of these different additives that'll feed your coral. rather than having people just do water changes and rely on stability. And every single major media company pushed that narrative because all of them were getting kickbacks from trace element companies. Now, that's not to say trace elements are bad. ICP and trace supplementation has changed the game. We have essentially perfected inorganic chemistry at this point, which is a very good thing. But that should not be like basically DOC, the health of our entire systems, should not be sacrificed for chasing numbers from ICP, which may or may not be accurate. Knock on wood, I don't get cussed at for that one. So, that's the thing, is we have missed the forest for the trees. The industry and the ignorance and greed in it, perpetuated by basically every company and media organization over the last 15 years, has duped you and has convinced you that these things don't matter. And the people that were educated, that actually know what they're talking about, that were telling you about this a decade and a half ago, were ignored. Like, it's quite sad, to be honest, that the industry is at a place to where money matters more than the health of our systems. People would rather lie to you, not look at the data, or just remain ignorant to all of it and sell you a product that they have no data, to support that it works, than try to develop a methodology which actually aligns with years of peer-reviewed data, with the most accurate model of reef recession that exists. The DDM model is supported by data from over 50 reefs globally. Like, it is statistically significant, more than so many other studies out there. Like, this is irrefutable data, but yet the people that make products for coral care don't give a shit about it or don't know about it. Both are equally alarming. We should be having industry leaders and people that own these corporations that are designing products that are informed. And I'll tell you this, and this is the sad part. This is the dark side of the industry that no one wants to talk about because everyone makes money from it. Out of everyone I've talked to, maybe 5% of the people that are in the industry actually give a shit about coral. The rest are just doing it. It's an easy way to make money. They can go buy stuff from China and they can slap the reef tax on it and they can make money. And that's fine, right? People got to make a living. People have to make a business. But in a business to where your products inherently affect living creatures, a little bit unethical, I think. Every other animal care industry is not as bad as this. The reptile industry has collectively came together and funded research projects to determine what the best wavelength and the optimal wavelength of UV is for absorption with reptiles, for all of their basking. And then all of that data has informed the industry and has led to better product development. With reef keeping, we have people that are PhDs in biochemistry telling everyone what we should do, and they're shut up. And a product that does the inverse of what they're saying and what a decade and a half of global research says, and it's pushed down your throat, or it's sold in a Petco, or it's sold on every single major platform, and every single person out there that's creating content is telling you to buy it because they're getting paid to say that. It's bullshit, and all of you should be pissed. I am. I've reached the point now to where seeing the reefs that were just completely dead, it's like, what the fuck are we doing? Pardon my language, but we need to be demanding quality products. Yeah, we need to have higher expectations for what we're being given. Because the thing is that many people that are coming into this wonderful hobby, which has so much to give and so much that, it can make people passionate about this. Like, for Christ's sake, I was like a child and I went to the sea school and I saw that they had fish tanks and it sent me down this entire life path. I was inspired to go, and I am doing coral research now. And hopefully someday I'll get a PhD and can actually give something back to this world to help change it and make it better. There's so many people that, that I know that are younger like me that have been inspired in a similar way. But the thing is for every single one of those potential people that could go on to really do something in marine science that are influenced by this industry and the good it has to give, like, what happens? They come into the industry, they're told how to care for their corals by a big conglomerate on YouTube, they're adding the wrong shit to their tank, and they kill everything. And they're disenfranchised, and they give up. There could be so many more brilliant people that are in reefing if we could make it so reefers are more successful. And the one thing that's making them not successful is misinformation. And that is driven by greed, ignorance, or people who are malicious. Now, the malicious one, that is a very small minority. But greed and ignorance, hell yes. 95% of the industry. That's the truth. I came into this extremely passionate about all of this. And I was someone with a tank, someone doing research. I've worked with a bunch of different LFSs. And the deeper and deeper I've gotten in this industry, the more I've seen the ugly underbelly of it. And the fact that half the people out there don't know what the hell they're talking about. And that is concerning. Those people are like half the company owners are just business majors who aren't informed about any of this, who don't even know what the hell coral is, but they go to a board meeting and they see, this other company's doing this. And it's just a giant game of telephone, which has led in, it's been disastrous. So yeah, that's kind of like where I'm at with this. It's pretty disgusting, to be honest. And I think that companies are not going to change because it's a business model. But I think that what we ought to do is demand a change, right? We're consumers. We can control who we spend our money with. I think that we ought to support companies which are transparent about what's in their products, which share data about what their products do, and money controls it all. If we don't spend our money with people who are selling us bullshit in a bottle, then eventually the market can shift them out. That is supply and demand. Like, I don't know. It's just, we need an intellectual audit on this entire industry. We need someone to come in, or a team of people to come in and just evaluate all of this. Send it all in send it all in to be sequenced. Send it all in to be organically analyzed. What the hell is in half this stuff? What are we adding to our tanks? We don't need immunostimulant that can help with coral. We don't need that bullshit. We should be told what is in our tanks so all of us can work together to optimize and determine, what is best for our coral. And it's not just us. All of what we're doing can help inform conservation work. I went to the Florida Reef Track restoration project in Orlando, and I spoke with, Justin Zimmerman, who manages all of the endangered Caribbean corals, and they have a coral gene bank. And what I talked to him, I'm like, who determines like what methodology that people are using, who decides, what is the right thing to do. And it all goes through a ton of red tape, which is understandable. That's good. That is distinct from the industry. These are people who are educated, who know what's happening, and they have a very high throughput process to analyze what are the best methods for taking care of coral that is critically endangered and they are trying to spawn for the future of Caribbean reefs. So that's good. What's bad, though, is that many of those people, while they are smart and intelligent in terms of understanding how coral function, they don't have the experience of growing coral. They're not someone who's done it for 20 to 30 years of their life. There is a minority of people with a shoe in both worlds who have gone and have the experience of farming and growing coral, and also intellectually, or have like worked in a lab, or have gone through and read all the literature to understand what the hell they're talking about. And what I think we need is a synthesis of these two worlds. We need to have crosstalk and communication. There are things that, someone like Sanjay or Mike Pauletta or Chris Meckley, as much as people go and make fun of them for being old, they've been through it. They grow coral. They know what the hell they're doing. They've made it work, and they've been doing it longer than I've been alive, longer than most people in this chat or in the industry have been doing it, and they've been doing it successfully. Those types of people should be chatting with the people who are in charge of reef restoration projects. We should have this, combination of minds where we share experience and precise mechanistic knowledge and bring them together to begin asking and, fine-tuning our care methods. And instead, we have a bunch of people who don't know what the hell they're talking about selling you bullshit in a bottle. And everyone that's in this industry is paid to tell you to buy it. It's a fucking travesty. That's what's happening. And, forbid my language. If someone wants to come on here and tell me to check my language, you can check off the stream. Free country, So this is how I feel.
Can I tell you to check your language? All right, goodbye.
Okay, thanks. Okay. So, what do we need from all of this? What is the new method of reefing? My article was not about dissolved organic carbon. It was, but it wasn't. My article is advocating for all of us to think and all of us to put our money into the right things. We should question everything, because I can tell you right now that everyone on the product side of this industry, half of them are ignorant and the other half are greedy. They don't know what the fuck's going on. There are so many good companies out there. There's a lot of great products, and there's a lot of people who do care, but many of them don't. Many of them are carbon copies, and they want to shove products down your throat. We need to be informed consumers. Look at the research, look at the data, look at what companies are transparent and willing to put their money where their mouth is, and we should choose those companies. I'm not calling out any specific brand. I'm not calling out any specific method. None of that. I'm not even calling out the people. Most of these people that I've met that have companies I don't agree with, I really like as people. This is attacking ideas, not the people behind them. And, I don't have beef with really anyone in this industry at all. I like many people. Most of us are in it for the same reasons. But what I have a problem with is when greed gets in the way of that passion. And I've seen that happen a lot. There's so much stuff that's just blatantly corrupt I know about that I'm really not at liberty to speak about, that I don't feel that I need to. But just, man, this industry is not all sunshines and rainbows. And there's really no one willing to tell you what's really there. So if that's the case, I think we have to all work together and determine what's really there. We need to all, like Sanjay says, be those monkeys in a barrel and work together to determine what works and what doesn't. We need to have community science, community tinkering, where we can utilize tools like ICP, like NDoc, like aquabiomics, like our inorganic testing we can do at home. And we need to try things. Experimenting is what makes a good reefer, I think. I think determination, experimentation, and passion. I think out of all the people that I've met in this industry now, and I've met a lot that are still in it and still really care, that's what they all have in common. They care about it. They do it because they love it. They never stop learning, and they're always trying to make it better because it can be better. This is something that's inherently new that, we've only been doing for the last 50 years, really, keeping coral in a glass box. And there's so much potential for the future of that, and probably in 50 years, many of the corals on the planet will only be kept in a glass box. Most of the Caribbean species already are. There are critically endangered corals, which are only kept alive through methods that we have developed in this industry. So I think that we ought to, everyone that is passionate, band together. We should use that passion to get to developing better methods. We should be like the reptile industry. We should have an audit on our methods, and we should look at them all and not have attachment to those ideas, or I've been doing this for 20 years, but everyone should work together to step back 20 feet and say, okay, let's look at the data. Let's look at what works experientially, and let's see what we should do. Let's see what we should leave behind, and let's see what we should bring forward, and let's see what we should bring a magnifying glass to. And, this isn't about experience or age or any of that. It's about people who are passionate and actually care about coral. And I think that's a lot of people in this industry. I think we constantly get stuck in really stupid tribalistic fights of I use LEDs, I use halides. We both grow coral, where I use this brand, I use that. It ultimately does not matter. People, I think, are very lost in the modern world because of the decline of third places, because there's not community, because, there's not really a lot of meaning for some people, which is the sad reality of how, 21st century society is. It's increasingly isolated, yet we're interconnected through the internet. Really weird time to be alive, but I think that people try to find meaning, and they do that by clinging to ideas and different brands. And I don't think we need to cling to all of that, all the corporate nonsense that just divides us further. I think we all need to cling to the fact we give a shit about coral. We enjoy looking at those candy canes and seeing their sweeper tentacles come out and seeing them eat is really cool, and they're like aliens. And I live in Kansas, and I've never even seen anything like that in my life, right? We need to cling to the fact that this is something that's enjoyable, that you can come and set down after a long day of grinding 9 to 5 for not shit for a wage, and you can look at a little world you've created that's a slice of the ocean in your own home and bond with your family over it and have your kids name your fish, and you can relax and you can see something that people hardly ever get to see in your own home. That is what we should be bonding about. The fact that all this is really cool, the fact that it's awesome that we have even figured out how to do this, and we need to have a cheers to the future of us trying to do it better. So I think enough of the drama, enough of the tribalism, enough of the corruption from the industry, and the ultimate solution relies on all of us working together, having some camaraderie, and actually caring about the coral and ourselves, kind of like a love thy neighbor moment. I might get in fights with people over stupid shit on Instagram, but I don't have anything against them. And I shouldn't be doing that either, to be honest. We all need to be the bigger person and all look at what we have in common. We're all random people across the world who like to look at glass boxes. That's what I think. I think we need a new method of reefing, one that is both intellectual/philosophical and one that is based in the approaches that we have. I think chasing DOC is good. I think chasing pH is good. I think water changes are good. I think having ICP and doing the traces is good. I think doing aquabiomics and looking at your microbiome, beginning to tinker to see how we can make it manageable is good. All of these things need to be synthesized together into a holistic method driven by passion and the desire to learn more. And that's my rant. That's my rant. I got fired up there. I'm going to drink some water, and I am now open to questions. Yes, so certain dissolved organic carbons will bind to granular activated carbon. Certain ones will bind to GFO. There's things like Fosgard, like silica-based medias that they might bind to as well. The thing is, DOC has many different chemicals. So there's like humic acids, flamic acids. There's all of the poly and monosaccharides. So you kind of have to truly have one media that can bind to everything is pretty tough. Like in commercial wastewater, how they manage DOC is like a 12-step process involving like 6 different flatulence, a settling bed. Then they have anaerobic and aerobic, microbes break down all those flocks. Then they go and put it through different like low micron membranes. So there's like a very complex method, at least in commercial wastewater, of how they manage DOC because it's such a complex mixture of chemicals. And all those chemical families all have different features which make them, hard to bind to. So I think that there definitely likely are some potential things we could add in terms of chemical media to lower DOC. I think those will need to be figured out. But I think that GAC, that was shown back with Feldman and Sanjay, that GAC does bind to some DOC compounds, molecules. Skimmers also take out a fraction of DOC. GFO also takes out a fraction of DOC. So, I think that chemical media can go a long way, but ultimately having something like a cryptic sump to where you directly have sponges uptaking it in a natural way. You have sponge looping, assuming you get lucky and you don't have any sponges that produce allelopathic compounds and inhibit coral growth. And I think also water changes goes a really, really long way. Yeah, like Lucky Day just said, sponges live off DOC, get the good ones. And I also think that it's important to have a very high density of them. So having something like a cryptic sump is going to be important to actually have a measurable effect on your DOC if you're trying to go the sponge route. So for instance, I've got a cryptic sump, but I've not done a water change in 2.5 years and I feed really heavy. So that cryptic sump, while it's probably working overtime and I have a ton of sponges, it alone is not managing it. If I had a bigger one, it might. Okay, let's see. I am new to reef keeping. Been doing freshwater for all my life. All this stuff makes a lot of sense in freshwater too. Oh yeah, freshwater is just as bad. I worked at Petco for a super long time and half the products on the shelf, like peak snake oil. Everything is. There's good products out there too. Probably, right? I've not heard anything bad about pineapple sponges, but obviously I don't know what metabolites they produce. For all we know, because I've not seen any data on it. Maybe someone has generated it. Sean Ono might be able to know. He knows a lot of random stuff. Maybe pineapple sponges produce allelopathic compounds that can inhibit coral growth. Who knows? But from what I've seen and experientially, I'm pretty sure that the consensus right now is that pineapple sponges are good. Best option for removing nitrate for nanotanks, doing a water change. So, based on everything I just said, refugium, I think, is shooting ourselves in the foot. We need more data on that, but I really, really think that it's probably not good. So good old-fashioned water changes. If you can't do water changes, there's many other methods you could do. So you could try to get some of the really super porous, get some Bacani rock or like some of the media that doesn't leach like heavy metals, and try to get some ammomox going on, or like some actual bacteria that will convert nitrates into nitrogen gas. You can get lucky and have that happen in a system sometimes. But water changes, if you're not in a water restricted area or you've got the cash for salt, is the easiest way to go. Should I feed my chlorpid to my fish when I have excess, or should I toss it in the trash? So if you are feeding the chlorpid to your fish, you're not going to have, you basically have like a net zero increase or decrease in carbon at that point at DOC. So, that carbon is still in the system. It's just changing forms, being digested by the fish. Oh, yeah, there's a ton of data about sponges. Hell yeah. Okay, let's see. Now, about what species of sponges would be applicable in the hobby, maybe not, but let me pull up the super crazy dissertation I found when I wrote this, the DOC article. I've got it over here. Let me try to find if this is the correct one. That's not it. That's the 11-page one. It's like 150 pages. It's insane. There was one guy that did a dissertation only on sponges, like the metabolism of 3 species of sponges in the Caribbean. And he did so much work. He calculated the square centimeter, volume of sponges and how efficient they were at DOC cycling. He had it all figured out. I can't. Oh, it looks like that link is actually broken now. So I'll have to find it later. But if you look at my DOC article in the citations to the sponge link, if you look up that title for the sponge one, you'll be able to find it. But yeah, there's a lot of data about sponges. The question is, we don't have data about the sponges we have in the hobby. There's not a lot of taxonomy work on them either. Okay, why not carbon dosing? So all of this is my opinions right now. We are doing the community science project on carbon dosing starting probably next week. So we will actually have data to potentially substantiate these claims. These are my hypotheses right now. But because excess dissolved organic carbon of basically any carbon source besides 3 really, really weird ones that cost $300 a gram on sigmaaldrix.com and are produced only in coral mucus, besides those 3 carbon sources, every other carbon source basically feeds potentially pathogenic bacteria, copiotrophic bacteria. Even if they're not pathogenic, they directly outcompete the oligotrophic bacteria, which are beneficial. Things like picoplankton, like the Cytococcus, the Prochlorococcus, Pelagibacter acea. Those are the 3 big ones that corals are shown to uptake as food, as well as putative symbionts like Endozoicomonas that live in the coral's tissue across almost all coral species. So really, really good coral-associated bacteria, the ones that feed them and the ones that are probiotics and protect them and help with nutrient cycling, they prefer low-carbon environments. When we add carbon to a system, we are shifting the environmental balance to bacteria that like more carbon. Then, through natural selection, through that environmental pressure, I suspect that those bad bacteria outcompete the good ones. So likely it's growing bacteria, it's lowering our nutrients, but it's also causing a pathogenic or an unfavorable shift in our microbiome. But I don't have data to support that yet. I'm basing that off the DDAM stuff and a lot of controlled studies exposing individual corals to different carbon sources. But we will have data with aquabiomics very soon revealing what's going to happen in our tanks. Yeah, so a lot of sponges in terms of the metabolism, this whole paper, I mean, there was a couple of primary trace elements they utilized. They utilized DOC and DOM as their primary nutrition source. Then 15% of their metabolism was bacterial plankton. But these were only 3 species in the Caribbean. So if that's a universal model for sponge metabolism, it is unknown. The thing is I don't know. I mean, you could try to go and get a sponge which like absorbs excess nickel or something, but you're gonna have to know the exact species of that sponge. I find that species and have someone import it, which is highly unlikely, and then you're gonna have to grow enough of it to remove that excess nickel. When you could just do water changes. So, like, yeah, theoretically it'd work, but a lot of barrier to entry there for actually making that happen. Like Sean just said, there's not really a lot of taxonomic work on sponges. So even if there's 5 articles that exist in the world over the last 150 years showing that X species, metabolizes copper, you got to then have a diver go out, or you got to make sure that species is legal to collect. Then have a diver go out which knows taxonomy of sponges based on observation enough to collect it, which is like impossible. Like all sponge ID is like molecular at this point. So it's a nice thought, but I think that's unlikely to be a solution for high traces. There's many other low-hanging fruit we could explore. Sponges. That's about it. Sponges and the complex marine carbon cycle, to where it's eventually stored in the form of like sandstone and limestone, like calcium carbonate. So corals themselves will act as carbon sinks. All the like animals in the ocean, as they move from low to high trophic level, are carbon sinks. The problem now is that we have too much carbon entering the system, and there's not enough things that can biologically or geologically act as a sink for it. So there is basically, in the oceans, what we have is an imbalance between nutrient import and nutrient export. Overfishing, other types of climate change, all of these things cause a reduction in what's exporting it, and we continue to import it. So that's what's happening there. Sounds like some sponges. They're probably good. But yeah, I mean, sponges are like and there's not a lot known about them in science or anything. Probably not, to be honest, no. All you can really do is likely create the environment that is favorable for them. If you have any selective carbon source that they can metabolize, so those 3 primary ones that are produced in coral mucus, guess who else can metabolize them? The bad guys. Basically, the bad guys are not picky eaters. They eat any and all carbon sources. The good guys they're on a real special diet. They eat those 3 carbon sources and nothing else, because they've evolved to for millions of years, because they've lived with the coral as an endosymbiont for that long. So the problem is, if you were to dose those carbon sources, the bad guys can eat them just as well as the good guys. So you would be, feeding maybe the entire system, but the bad guys can also eat faster than the good guys. So you would likely have the same problem as what I think other carbon sources would cause. So in terms of actually adding a metabolism as a prebiotic, at least in our systems, I think is probably not the right strategy. And while it may work for other microbial systems, I don't think it really works too well with coral, just because, the transcription factor or the virulence factor for many of these opportunistic pathogens is high carbon concentrations, no matter the carbon source. At least that's what data says now. So yeah, Remy is a rapper. You should hear Remy's raps. Andrew, if it happens, then I will use my 3 tanks here. Yeah, so PNS is probably good. That's something we want to look at as well. So maybe PNS can lower DOC. PNS themselves, at least the strains that are in the commercially available products, are not potential pathogens. So if you're introducing those, you could potentially outcompete some of the opportunistic Rhodobacter ACA. But again, there's no data behind any of this. Andrew and Eli and I were talking, and we were thinking about potentially having, a study in the fall where we add PNS and measure the effect of the microbiome that way. It's not going to be a traditional carbon source or dosing. You're not going to be really feeding into good families. You're just introducing alternative families, which perform a function. They're valuable and as diazotrophs, they take nitrogen, they feed the corals. So they're good for that. But in terms of restructuring the microbial community, maybe not. We'd have to see. But yeah, let's see. Any other questions? Tonight was mostly just a vent session. I've not been on here in a very long time. I wanted to get fired up and talk about the industry because I've been thinking for an entire month in Bahamas and witnessing stuff going on. So, yeah, I wanted to talk about the DOC thing and all of that. So, ORP can measure DOC. The thing is that ORP measures like any type, like anything, right? In terms of an oxidizer or an oxidizing agent or a reducing agent. It can measure all of those things, and it's the redox potential of all of those different molecules. So dissolved organic carbon, if you have it higher in a system, it is very likely to contribute to ORP being lower, but there are many other alternative things which could also cause low ORP. So while ORP being high or low may be indicative of your DOC, it's not like a one-to-one correlation because there's many alternative things that can basically, take place and play into that reading. So I think that ORP can be a good kind of gut check of like how clean/dirty your tank is, and that might be indicative of total organic carbon or dissolved organic carbon. But ultimately, you're probably going to have to look at a total carbon analyzer and send in an NDOC test. Do you think, depending on where corals collected, affects your ability to deal with different pathogens? Yes. So basically, how do I explain this? So there are many different microbial taxa which are associated with different families of coral, and all of that's regional. So there's not really like a one-size-fits-all coral microbiome. The thing that's one-size-fits-all is the function of those microbial families. So you're always going to have someone that's a diazotroph, someone involved in nutrient cycling, someone that can downregulate local opportunistic pathogens by producing anti-biofilm compounds, and it's kind of a central regulator. But based on the species of the coral, the location it's collected, even if you have the same species on the same reef, if you have like a 20-meter drop and you've got coral living along this gradient in the same species, all of them can have diverse microbiomes that are distinct. Now, it's the same function. They uptake the same, different families that do the same job, but you're never going to have one microbiome be identical to the other. Additionally, the microbiomes are fluid. They are not stable. So the corals, based on their external environment, are constantly recruiting and kicking out different microbial families and switching up the composition of that microbiome. It's a constant play of natural selection to where if there is a need or a want in the coral's holobiont, it can recruit different families which can perform that need. And if they do a shitty job, they get outcompeted or the coral expels them and they recruit someone else. So sometimes you might have corals from different regions which have a more robust microbiome, and they have families which are more likely to be beneficial in terms of dealing with external stress or external pathogens. You might have families that directly inhibit Vibrio and things like that. You might have families which can basically absorb and metabolize free radicals and help with stress events. So it really is a complete crapshoot and a gamble. And there's not enough data to say coral from where or species from where are more resilient or not. We just know there's certain families that are some of those more resilient families. And those are potential probiotics that could be isolated. So things like Endozoicomonas, Halomonas, Gobatia, those are all very good families in the literature. Okay. Do you think ozone, or what do you think about ozone eliminate DOCs? Yeah, so ozone is a tool that's used in commercial wastewater to lower DOC. So ozone can oxidize some molecules which compose DOC and make it so they can easily be removed through other chemical or mechanical methods like a skimmer or GAC. Now, while that might be a useful tool, ozone could also potentially harm the microbiome. We don't know yet. So in my mind, if you're at the decision tree of I want to lower my DOC, here is my method, you should also filter that method of DOC reduction through the microbiome. So we know that high DOC is likely contributing to a poor microbiome. If the method you're using to lower your DOC also harms the microbiome, you're now, not really fixing the issue, so to speak. You're kind of back to ground one. You don't really have a gain or an increase. So in my mind, until there's more data about ozone, it could be a useful tool. Running it for only a couple hours is likely better than running it 24/7. But I suspect that it could likely have a suppressive effect on planktonic communities similar to UV. But I think that you're doing it right, running it only a couple hours at a time. The question is there enough planktonic bacteria to repopulate during that time? I don't know. Andrew or Eli would probably be able to speak on if there's any data. Oh, you just typed. Okay, so yeah, ozone zaps pelagibacter. There we go. I didn't know if they had determined that or not. So, okay, yeah, ozone might not be the best for our microbiomes. It can remove DOC, though. So maybe we should find better tools to remove DOC. GAC, GFO potentially in very small moderation if your phosphates are high enough. Things like that. Water changes. I know you don't agree with amino acids, but I've heard you explain why. I'm guessing that's in the DOC. Okay, yes, adding amino acids will add DOC to the system, but also, and this is something I have mentioned once, which probably people will get pissed off about, but there have been copious studies which show that amino acids are a chemotactic stimuli for Vibrio. So Vibrio will respond to certain chemical signals produced by coral mucus. Typically, when coral gets stressed, they produce these compounds in their mucus as a byproduct of like stress-based reduction pathways. So DMSP, dimethylsulfonylpropionate, is one example of that. That's the most notorious chemical which causes Vibrio to quite literally swim directly towards the coral. It's like a lightning rod, like a dinner bell, attracting coral pathogens to the stressed out coral. What no one has talked about is that amino acids, a mixture of amino acids, I need to look at exactly which amino acids again, are a higher chemotactic stimuli than even DMSP is. So like in the study, they directly compare DMSP and an amino acid mixture. And the graph is like this for DMSP and like this for amino acids. So if we're adding purified, concentrated amino acids to our tanks, and there's coral pathogens in the tank, sounds like a recipe to disaster for me. I think if you've got corals that have come from a very low nutrient environment and are suffering, then having controlled amino acid dips and monitoring the pH and keeping it stable could be a valuable tool. These are things the Coral Reef or the Caribbean Reef Restoration Program has done. Sarah Stevens talked about this. So they had a bunch of Acropora, either Cervicornis or Palmata, that were starving, that were not surviving. They came from like a very, very like nutrient poor, I think it was like a lab system. They just didn't know how they were keeping corals. And to save them, they were dipping them in amino acids as they were bleaching. And they was able to save a couple. So I don't think amino acids are all evil. I think they can be a tool for the job. And I think there's likely some different amino acids which Vibrio do not respond to, but that needs to be tested. As of now, they scare the shit out of me. Using coral snow also likely will add DOC to the system. I mean, it's cool as a flatulent, right? I think flatulents are kind of cool. Adding calcium carbonate and stuff. That could be pretty interesting, but who knows? There's not really any data on it. The question is, the coral snow we have in a bottle, is it really like a one-to-one with actual coral snow in nature? Probably not. Tanks 5 years or older, good idea to put Rebel from Aquid Biomes readers on the bacteria back in the tank that may have been outcompeted. So the thing is Eli's sand is great, or Rebel, any of the media, but if you don't have the right chemistry to sustain the good bacteria in your system, you're unlikely to be able to change that community much. So even if you have all of those good guys in Eli's sand, if you add that into your system and it's a copiotrophic environment, all of those good oligotrophic bacteria will likely get outcompeted and just get their ass kicked. So what I would do before doing that is send in an NDOC test, evaluate your DOC, and then if it's high, take steps to reduce it. And then at that point, look at reseeding your microbiome with live rock, live sand, Eli's media, and you will likely have much more success with shifting your microbial community at that point. I think the DOC is a barrier to entry for a healthy microbiome. At least that's what I think now. Could change. Good data, and I'm completely wrong, and vodka's the answer to everything, and vodka selectively grows pelagibacter. Who knows? Do you think it is easier to prevent the introduction of coral pathogens or deal with them when they're already present in your aquarium, or is there no real answer to that? So the thing is that it depends on what you mean by pathogen, right? The putative pathogens, the Vibrio coriolyticus, the guys that are pretty much universally bad. I don't know. There's the whole prophylactic antibiotic thing, but I think that's likely doing a lot more harm than good. You're wiping out a lot of the good guys along with those potential bad ones, and you're leaving your coral with a much less robust holobiont at that point. Now, in terms of like, having them already present in the system, same thing with intake antibiotics. Pretty scary right now. Needs to be tested a lot more. We need a better method. But there's also more than just putative pathogens. There are opportunistic pathogens. So, like I've talked about many times, many of the good guys that are naturally a part of a healthy holobiont, families that perform a good function, can become pathogenic as the environment changes. So those copiotrophic bacteria are kept at bay and kept working with the coral when there's low carbon. But if there's high carbon, they become bad. So a healthy coral microbiome involves some element of having opportunistic pathogens colonize that microbiome. So I don't think there's really a just top-down, one-size-fits-all, or even a healthy way to get rid of all pathogens from a coral, because that would mean we get rid of all the potential pathogens too. It's just like human microbiota. Many of us have, different strains of E. coli and stuff like that, that if we're unhealthy can become pathogenic. But when we're healthy, we have the proper amount of fiber and things like that. They perform a very good, role and function in our microbiome. Same thing with like yeast in our intestinal tract. It's all about balance. You can't just get rid of the bad and have the good. Things are not black and white like that, and we like to reduce them like that because we're humans and the world is complicated. Are low nutrients indicative of a good microbiome and ultimately low DOC? So, I don't know, right? Corals utilize nitrogen in the form of ammonia, or they have diazotrophs and they can uptake those nitrogen sources through, horizontal transfer basically. Or they utilize phosphorus, inorganic phosphorus. But they also, all the good bacteria thrive in low DOC. The coral are healthy in low DOC. And most natural reefs have low inorganic nitrate and phosphate values. So this is something I talk on in the article. Fundamentally, we're barking up the wrong tree with coral nutrition. In nature, heterotrophic nutrition and inorganic nutrition in the corals is taken care of by eating picoplankton. Because we don't really have any picoplankton, or at least high enough density of them, or the right strains in our systems, corals are kind of always starving compared to how they are in nature. Thus, to make up for that metabolism we're missing out on, we have to bump up our inorganic nitrogen and phosphorus concentration so the coral can still be alive. I think that's kind of how we've worked around the problem of not having proper heterotrophic nutrition. But I think in a future where we have picoplankton, we can get around that, and we can strive for ultra low nutrient conditions. And that helps algae, that helps everything. I'm reading the KFC comment, and I'm thinking of how to reply. It's asinine. It makes no goddamn sense. It should not be used. It is dangerous for human health. It is bad for coral health. You're nuking the entire holobiont when you don't even know what you're targeting. When the person that came up with it can't even tell you what's wrong with the coral. And that's because every type of coral disease, it manifests differently. It's the Ancarina principle. All healthy microbiomes are the same, but all things with a disrupted microbiome are sick in their own way. Based on the localized environment and that localized fluid microbiome and the microbiome and the surrounding planktonic environment, all of these things shift over a function of time and are inherently chaotic and can't be predicted, even with like nonlinear mathematical models we have right now. We're having to apply AI to this shit in academia to even understand how these systems all interact with each other. And you're telling me that a guy with just no education about this shit said, all right, we got the fix. It's ignoring years of data. It's ignoring how all coral disease works. And it is applying human health models and everything that's wrong and is with big pharma to corals. Coral health, not human health. Coral microbiome, not human microbiome. Opportunistic pathogens, shift in the microbiome, differential pathogenic gene expression, stress-based metabolites, which are act as chemoattractants for pathogens already in the system. All of the good guys that are integral to protecting the corals from those things, and then you're nuking them. Let's add hydrogen peroxide and completely nuke everything on the holobiome. Then let's put them in 4 different antibiotics at a random dosage at a random contact time, just for shits, for fuck's sake. And then let's put them in hydrogen peroxide again, and also throw them in iodine, and then let's put them in our tank. If your microbiome is fucked up in your tank and you just did it at the coral, you completely stripped its microbial environment. It's going to go and try to reuptake new symbionts. And guess what? If your microbiome is already in a pathogenic state, it's then going to go and uptake, unhealthy micro. Like, it makes no goddamn sense. And on top of that, we're utilizing human antibiotics, fluoroquinolones, like Cipro, that are utilized, and amoxicillin, that's not a fluoroquinolone, but amoxicillin, 2 antibiotics that are used in human medicine. And we're exposing ourselves to them and our families to them in low dosages. And just like I said, we have potentially pathogenic bacteria in all of us. Many human infections are caused by an imbalance in those bacterial communities. If you're constantly using Cipro because you don't know how the hell to take care of your tank, and you let it be unbalanced in the first place, and you're using it as a Band-Aid solution to save your corals because you're cutting corners and not doing the proper husbandry, and you're letting things let go, you're exposing yourself to those antibiotics and likely making your own microbiome resistant to them, which means you could have antibiotic resistant human pathogens. And it does the same thing with coral Like, it's illegal. All this is regulated now, so it's being sold out the back door. It's dangerous, and it makes no goddamn sense. OA is something which makes a lot more sense, right? It is a targeted low dosage. It is an antibiotic that is not being used in human medicine. It targets only gram-negative bacteria because it's a quinolone, not a fluoroquinolone. It doesn't have that extra fluorine that allows it to penetrate gram-positive bacteria's cell walls. There is less collateral damage. Andrew, Chris Meckley, Keith, many others have done lower doses, and there's a lot less collateral impact on the microbiome. You are able to selectively knock out some of those pathogenic families. Now, it is still not perfect because it is still indiscriminately killing a lot that's out there. So for instance, Vibrios, there's some that are good. There's some Vibrios that don't become pathogens and are actually some of the most important symbionts to protecting the coral from external pathogens. So, OA could wipe out all the Vibrio in a system, and, that could be bad potentially. So I think it's good for now. I think it's a good tool. It's much more selective, especially compared to Cipro, and especially compared to the KFC dip where you're throwing in everything at it. And I think it makes a lot more sense. But I think that ultimately there will be better ways forward in the coming years. There's going to be some new science that'll rear its head. Iodine, I would like to actually do a controlled study seeing what effect it has on the holobiome, if it can penetrate deep enough to actually kill the endosymbionts, the bacteria inside of the coral. Maybe. You might have to have a long exposure time for that. But likely what iodine would be doing is wiping the slate clean like the KFC dip does. But it's actually probably wiping the slate clean. You're likely not going to have as many survivors, kind of like hydrogen peroxide, would. Now, hydrogen peroxide is probably not good for corals. Iodine is a lot less stressful, but you still have the same issue where if you wipe the coral clean and introduce them into an unhealthy environment, they then will uptake all those unhealthy guys back onto them. And you have the same problem again. You'll see reinfection occur. So ultimately what we have to do to avoid all of this is to have a healthy microbiome in our systems. So there was that rant. So, yeah, there's lots of ways. Not at liberty to speak about them now, but yes, there are some very clear ways forward. Yeah, I'm sure that it can save it. Like I say, it wipes the slate clean. But if your microbiome in your system is still messed up, you're going to have the same problem happen again anyways. Jelly is caused by a combination of different abiotic and biotic stress events and is a manifestation of external pathogens that are polymicrobial, not just bacteria, and also many of those good guys becoming bad. So while you can go and save your coral at that time by dipping them in an antibiotic, if there are any of the bad guys left over, they've now got a taste of that and they can become resistant. And as well as that, if you've not actually fixed the overall microbiome of your tank, it's likely the next time you have a stress event, you're going to have reinfection. So it's really just kicking the can down the road, I think. I think that it's much safer to use something like oxalic acid because we at least have an idea of what we're targeting then compared to just nuking everything. Oxalic acid is much more likely to keep the good guys that are important to the coral alive compared to nuking all of them. So it's the same idea to where if shit really hits the fan, you can save your corals and, you can use that as the fire extinguisher, as Andrew says, and put that fire out. But you're using a much more precise fire extinguisher. A scalpel, not a sledgehammer. It's still a sledgehammer, but much less of one. It's not a wrecking ball like the KFC dip. So that's my thoughts on that. Let's see. As for the reefs, we counter deforestation by planting trees. You mentioned a reef therapy that recently planted staghorns, I believe, were just wiped out. Do you think there's a way to combat pathogenic vents by propagating pathogen-resistant corals to help combat dying reefs? So that's kind of what a lot of the projects are doing right now. They're trying to select, basically do artificial selection, so assisted evolution with corals. So they take ones ahead of the disease wave of stony coral tissue loss disease in the Caribbean. They are then breeding them, in captivity, getting them to spawn, and they are beginning to expose them to higher and higher temperatures, higher, basically they introduce them to pathogens. Then they're screening for whole microbiomes and doing microbiome transfers. There's probiotic cocktails right now. So the eventual idea is that now that outplanting is not really working, is that we're going to focus on some of the deeper water, kind of the boulder corals that are more resilient because they're deeper down anyways to the heat stress events. And they're also some of the faster growing and more primary reef building corals. So conservation now is acropoids and any of this branching stuff is probably not going to make it. A resistant and resilient reef in the future looks like boulder corals, which can build a reef and still have that healthy nursery environment and promote different species to lay eggs. But we just have super boulder corals that we've outplanted, ones that have already been conditioned to that stress, both biotic and abiotic. But, who knows if it'll work? And that's the sad reality of it. It's a crapshoot. No, absolutely not. I do not. And that is because every bacterial product in the market does not contain good bacteria. This is another thing, and this is not just that brand. This is I'm not attacking a specific brand. The only brands that we know have ocean-associated microbes in them are Hydrospace's PNS ProBio, and that's only a small family, and Protobio Biodigest. But Biodigest also has some of these terrestrial strains. So what all of the bottled bacteria on the market is their human gut microbiota that are used in the human probiotics industry, which have been bought because they're cheap and they're easy to produce, and they put them in a bottle, and due to ignorance, they have sold them to you as a coral probiotic. In reality, the majority of those strains are not adapted and cannot live in a saltwater environment. And if they can, it's likely they could be outcompeting many of the good, bacteria that are there. It's not common that things like Bacillus as a family are associated with corals. In very low concentration, they are. But Bacillus subtilis, Lactobacillus, many of these common strains that are put in these products produce secondary metabolites, which are antibiotics. They kind of nuke everything around them, and that's why they're so good at colonizing things like the human intestinal tract. They are good competitors. They kick Vibrio's ass, but they also kick everything's ass. So if there are indeed saltwater adapted strains of things like Bacillus subtilis in these products, who knows what long-term effect they're having on the microbiome, because quite frankly, there are not that high of concentrations of these strains of bacteria on natural reefs. So I think it's something maybe not super good to do, but there's products that are good. I think the best thing to do is to add live rock and live sand from the ocean, or get some media from Eli. Then you know what's in there, or you at least know it comes from the ocean, and you can add it. Let's see. If I get some cycled media from Top Shelf Aquatics, would that help get my microbiome kickstarted for my new frag tank? I said, no. Any other tips for starting up a new frag tank? So here's the thing. Top Shelf is great. Great facility. But many of their tanks recycled without live rock or live sand. So it's likely that the media you're getting from them may be beneficial and may, have some of the good families in them, but you're likely to have a much better start with your tank if you get a robust microbial community you started with from the ocean. So, Eli sells his and he tests all the media for pathogens and ensures it's pathogen free. It's collected from deep offshore sites. So it still has many of the core microbial families that are found planktonically on reefs, but there's not any coral pathogens because there's no coral. So that's one example. At least that's my understanding of how it works after talking to Eli. I might be wrong. If Eli or Andrew are here, feel free to correct me on the explanation behind that product. But also just getting live sand or live rock, Aussie live rock, Solomon live rock, Tampa Bay live sand. Yeah, there you go. Those are all examples. So that is likely to be much, much better than any media from someone's tank. But if you can't afford that, and that's completely understandable because it's all very expensive, then getting media from someone's tank is a good bet. That's better than starting dry and adding just nitrifying bacteria and having white rock for sure. What do you think about Miracle Mud? Does it work to lower nitrates? Miracle Mud is really interesting. I would like to see if it's I would actually like to send it out a microbiome test to see if it is actual mud from like a mangrove flat or where it's collected. I don't know if, the guy that came up with it's a great guy. Seems very knowledgeable. He was pushing this way before anyone else. It all makes sense on paper. I just haven't seen, anything validating those claims. So I think it'd be cool to send in an ICP test to see what trace elements are actually in it that could leach out. And I think it'd also be cool to see the microbial community of it. Now, does it work to lower nitrate? I think if you had a deep enough substrate of it, sand bed of it, then yes, it could. But I think that also could be achieved with a deep sand bed or really any anaerobic space you could create in your tank. So is that a consequence of the Miracle Mud itself? Yeah, I think it's a consequence of the depth and the density of that media, though, if you pack it really tight and really have a lot of it. And that can be replicated many ways. There's a lot of ways to skin that cat. So having those anaerobic spaces, you can get the denitrifying bacteria or the bacteria capable of ammomox to where they can release nitrate. I guess ammomox can't. That's ammonia to nitrate. Sorry. Yeah, a ton. About 15 I can think of off the top of my head. There's a ton. All right. So that's my rant, people. I got fired up tonight. If I pissed you off, I'm sorry. I'm not talking about any company. I don't have beef with any company. I just have beef with the fact that a lot of us have let our passion go away and let greed get in the way of it. And I think we should all be a lot more passionate about coral. And, we all got to care a little bit more. So those are my thoughts there. If there are any last or burning questions, I can answer them. But if not, I think I'm going to log off tonight and I'm going to go work in my lab. Yeah, I don't know. There's like 10 different mud products. I mean, Miracle Mud, when I bought it last was still wet and like a big kind of, whatever, like a plastic, like cylinder thing. And it was still packed wet. So, yeah, Miracle Mud was wet the last time I used it. There's like 3 other mud companies though. So I got no idea. Yeah. Everyone love everyone. Yeah. Thank you, S2. Yeah, I think, the stuff from Tyree is awesome. All the cryptic sump stuff. I think that all the stuff from Julian Sprung and Charles, all that stuff is fantastic. All the early stuff. The thing is that many of the pioneers of this industry likely had the right approach. And those approaches have been convoluted and corporatized by people that are greedy. So go back to the roots. I think that the Berlin method and doing some water changes on top of it can get us a long way. It is likely better than many of the modern methods that are out there. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks. All right. I think my cortisol is high enough. My blood pressure got pretty high tonight. I've not been fired up, so I'm going to chill out and I'm going to go relax and work in my lab. I will see you all next Thursday at 7:45 Central. Be sure to tune in, be there, or be square.